All right. Let's get fired up here.
Maximum freedom. Read.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom.
Stay on target.
Maximum freedom. Read Rothbard.
Well, hello and welcome to the Actual Anarchy podcast. It's the podcast where we talk about movies from a Rothbardian, anarcho-capitalist perspective. My name is Daniel Elwood, and my co-host is Robert Johnson, and this is episode 176 of the show. We're going to be talking about The Robe, which is a film from the 50s starring Richard Burton and is a bit of a continuation of the story of the Crucifixion, some peripheral of the story and some of the aftermath. So I think it's going to be very appropriate that we do this one for Easter this year, as we did The Passion of the Christ, which is ultimately about the crucifixion, with the Anarcho-Christian last year, and he's back at it again, joining us this episode as well. But before we introduce him during the last night's portion of the show, I will let you know that you can get pre-show and post-show bonus content from us on Patreon at actualanarchy.com/Patreon. This is episode 176, and you find the show notes more at actualanarchy.com/176. Robert, save me.
What's up, Daniel? How are you? Good to be back on the show.
I'm doing well, sir. I'm doing well. It's good to see you. And I do have a question for you before we do introduce our guest. And that is, suppose somebody happened to have a restaurant in this COVID-19 time of their lives.
That poor bastard.
FEMA Region 10.
Yeah.
Would they, in operating such a restaurant now, would they be within the bounds of an unjust law under these emergency conditions, sir?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, all these, I was watching this Larkin Rose video the other day where he was talking about how these governors, even according to their own constitutions, don't even have the power to force businesses to close or to change them at all. So, yeah, this is all entirely, well, they're all immoral laws, but Daniel.
Well, my question is, are you, would such a person in operating the restaurant be within the bounds of following the unjust laws as they exist? And we must deal with the repercussions of those unjust laws, as immoral as they are. I'm not asking you to talk about your specific situation, nor admit any culpability or guilt in any way, sir.
I'm sorry, you broke my brain there for a second. Okay, so you're asking me if it's possible for a restaurateur to operate a business within the guidelines as they exist in FEMA Region 10 right now. Am I correct?
And still serve customers, still be operating.
Well, no. You can't actually. I mean, well, I suppose you could. Someone could walk up, lay down their money, and then walk away. And then the cashier could walk up, pick up the money, walk back to the cash register, take it, and then walk up, lay down the food, walk away, and the customer could come and pick it up. But no, we violate the social distancing stuff all the time. I don't think that's any kind of particular mandate, right? That's just a suggestion. But it seems like there are more and more brown shirt people out there all the time that are getting upset about it. Although in some areas, right, people are actually being arrested for not following whatever social distancing, whatever. And in fact, I saw like there was a fight that broke out. Some doctor assaulted two girls who were like within a few feet of each other or something like that. I think he violated the social distancing when he was choking her out, but I don't know.
Yeah, my favorite was the surfer or paddleboarder down in California who was nowhere near anybody. and then the police get close to him to apprehend him and then put him in a jail close to other people because he was violating social distancing, apparently, by being far, far away from people.
Yeah, I want to see what a social distancing arrest looks like, where the police actually follow the social distancing guidelines or rules or whatever. It's just a conversation between two people at distance. Now you need to go around. Okay, turn around. Okay, walk backwards. More. Okay, reach down, pick up the handcuffs, handcuff yourself. Okay, walk forward now.
Well, I will say this, and then we'll get into last night's portion of the show. They practice social distancing management with dogs all the time.
It's true. Before they get within 6 feet, they put them down.
Yep.
Smart. Those dogs may be carrying COVID.
It's a bold move. Just like this show and just like the Last Nighters, where we're going to be introducing our guest, the Anarcho-Christian. Stay tuned for all that right after this. Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, the Last Nighters, and we can be found on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. You can also find the show notes and more for this episode on the Robe at lastnighters.com/119. This is the 119th episode of the show. Now, last Easter, we did a special with the Anarcho-Christian on the Passion of the Christ, which was telling the story of the Crucifixion. This year, it's a bit of an appropriate continuation of that story as we get into some of the periphery and aftermath as we talk about the Robe with the Anarcho-Christian making his triumphant return, his annual, I guess it's not a trek to Mecca, right? It's sort of a different thing, a different trek. But Anarcho-Christian, if you are available to speak by unmuting, there you are. Welcome to the show. We do appreciate having you back on. It was a really good conversation last year, I might say. I know that I speak for Robert here, that we were both very nervous about your appearance last year for Passion of the Christ because we are atheists and you, of course, are Christian. However, we all share the bonds of anarchy. And so I think that it ended up being a really good discussion, and I will have the link to that episode on our show notes page for this one as well. I think it will be a good, like I said, continuation of that one. So welcome back.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thanks for having me back. And I agree that when we did this last year, I don't think any of us were really sure, what was going to come of watching a movie like that and talking about it. But I had a great time, and I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Yeah, indeed. And why don't you just remind everybody real quick where they can find what you do and what is it that you do? Where can they find it? And what has been, some recent stuff, recent appearances that you've made? And we'll, of course, put links to all of that stuff on our show notes page.
Well, I appreciate it. So Anarcho-Christian.com, that's our main hub that you can go to online to find out what we're doing. And you'll see articles posted there, as well as links to the podcast that I do. And, also we're on all the social media sites. So if you can find it all from Anarcho-Christian.com, or just go into the social media sites and type in the browser Anarcho-Christian, and it should pop up. And, but yeah, we've been, staying real busy with putting out the podcast every couple of weeks. And we've been doing that for a couple of years. And I was just recently had the pleasure of being on the Blast Off show a few days ago. I think we recorded that. So I'm not sure if it's out just yet, but it should be pretty soon.
All right. Yeah, very cool. And we will, of course, link to that. I was on their show, a year and a half ago, maybe 2.5 years ago now, episode 5. So I don't know what number they're on now. Did you happen to recall?
I did not catch the number.
Okay. Well, I know they're up there. But so I was on back, when I had something unique and interesting to say. Now it's all I'm like Joe Biden dementia style. I forget things all the time. But we'll of course put that on our show notes page, and of course the link to your previous appearances. And then We've had Raylene on a couple of times, and she'll be coming up with us again, I think, in a few weeks. So that'll be fun as well. So how we usually start this off is the old Google description. So if you can open your hymnals to 1953, please. This is the Robe. It's a drama/epic, 2 hours and 15 minutes long, though it feels longer. Am I right, Robert?
You're not wrong.
6.7 IMDb, 33% Rotten Tomatoes, 3.8 out of 5 on Netflix. Yet 88% of Google users like it. The description is, in this biblical epic, a drunk and disillusioned Roman, Marcellus Gallio, played by Richard Burton, wins Jesus's robe in a dice game after the crucifixion. Marcellus has never been a man of faith like his slave Demetrius, played by Victor Mature. But when Demetrius escapes with the robe, Marcellus experiences disturbing visions and feels guilty for his actions. Convinced that destroying the robe will cure him, Marcellus sets out to find Demetrius and discovers his Christian faith along the way. Came out September 16th, 1953. Director is Henry Koster, and it won a Golden Globe for Best Motion Picture Drama. It was the very first film ever to be filmed in CinemaScope, and just in watching it, you can kind of tell they are definitely making use of the entire widescreen format. They have the set purposefully set, like very wide, and they have action and activity going across from one side to the other. It really stands out, and I thought that was actually very well done and very prominent. So, Robert, I'll go to you for your reaction and opening information. Then we will go to Stephen for his reaction to your reaction, and then we'll get my piddling commentary somewhere sprinkled into the mix.
Ooh, spicy. Yeah, okay, so I had never heard of this movie before until last week when Daniel said we were doing it. And that's how I do this show. I just kind of find out along with everybody else what's going to happen. It's kind of exciting. But we haven't done one of these epic ones before, and it very much felt like it. It's done in that Ben-Hur style, Ten Commandments style, where you've got these giant sets and you've got all these extras in the background all doing this stuff, and you've got all these matte paintings all placed perfectly with the camera to make it look like they're in this huge place. And for the most part, I think it's pretty impressive. Like, this is the best they could do at the time. Obviously, this is way before CGI or any kind of special effects other than like stop motion animation and rear screen projection. And the acting though is very much kind of like stage style acting, where people are overly melodramatic. You don't get a lot of like tight close-ups. There's not a lot of camera movement. There's not a lot of, you have to be understood what kind of emotions you're expressing from 10 rows back. So it's very much played up for just a different kind of audience. So it's weird to watch a modern movie and then watch this movie, and it's just two wildly different styles of filmmaking. I just don't. It just shows its age so badly. But it's I guess it's how you do it back then. If you really want to place it in this setting in the ancient times, you got to make all these sets and all the matte paintings, and they really did their best to make the world feel alive, even though it felt more like a play with the way that the sets were constructed and the limited amount of character movement and that sort of thing. You're not going to have like a chase scene or anything like that. I mean, there was one. Hollywood, even back then, they could do like a horse chase scene. So they did that, but that's about it. And that was like almost rear screen projection style. Hey, someone's coming at us. But the story itself, if I could get around to talking about it at some point, is it's kind of like this redemption story, right? It's a guy who's just a cog in the machine for the most part, but he ends up being sent to this area where he's just doing his job, just following orders, doing his job for the most part. And he ends up taking part in the execution of Jesus, who is just this, unknown rando wizard guy, fanatic, religious fanatic, according to the Romans at the time. And there's a fair amount of, like superstition and what's really going on here. And is it guilt that's really plaguing this guy because he really feels something? Because he doesn't feel guilt about the other murders or the other killings. It's just the Jesus one, which is fine. But anyway, it's a really long kind of I don't know, maybe I've just been spoiled by modern cinema, and it's so much faster. It's just so much faster. You get it, things move on, but the pace here is really slow. The scenes kind of drag, and it just ultimately feels a little on the boring side. But I am open to have my opinion changed. Maybe I think probably what's going to happen is I'm going to enjoy this conversation more than I enjoyed the movie. Not that it's necessarily a terrible movie. I just think it's just really showing its age with this old ancient style of filmmaking. Even though they're obviously doing the best they could at the time. So.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Robert. And I agree with your initial take. And I think it is a result of similar to how we sort of critiqued Chuck Heston back in the day for being very stage actory, but it's a film. And so he's like almost overacting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually a recommendation that when Stephen and I were talking about, okay, let's do another episode, let's do an Easter show. And what should we do? And I was thinking something like, I don't know, something with Chuck Heston in it. He did 10 Commandments or something. And Stephen, you were like, no, man, Richard Burton, way better. Let's do the Robe. And I was like, all right, I'm convinced. Let's do it. So we're actually, next week, we're going to have a Chuck Heston film. So we're going to do the back-to-back. And I'll mention that at the very end. But so we will have some Chuck here. But we do see some of that similar kind of style, some of that delivery, the stage oration kind of thing. And you're right, Robert. It is almost like a play. Like they have these dramatic sets and they utilize the entire set rather than with camera moves. They have the people moving across this entire wide area. And also, it's sort of, I think that's what adds to the lengthy feel is that they sort of fade into this action, the scene, do this whole kind of lengthy scene, and then fade out. And then you're in a new scene where they do the same thing, and it just kind of feels sort of plodding along a little bit. But I think it's just a result of how films kind of were made back then, and it sort of makes sense in that regard. But I still think that it was a good story. I enjoyed it. It felt way longer than 2 hours and 15 minutes for some reason. It took me 3 nights. And if I wanted to get biblical, I was going to say 40 nights to watch it, but it was just 3 with my wife and I. And but we enjoyed it. I didn't take a whole lot of notes because I didn't find myself compelled to write anything down. It was weird, but I did notice that since we did Passion of the Christ last year, I kind of liked how the filmmakers sort of took it as a given that people who are going to be in the audience are going to know the story of the crucifixion. So they just kind of touch on it. They just sort of like, okay, this event kind of happens, but you don't see it. You don't even see Jesus when he's carrying the cross. You see his like legs and his arms, and that's it. And I wonder, and I'll direct this to you, Stephen. Do you think that was a purposeful thing to not show Jesus because that might have been, I don't know, maybe something that the audience wouldn't like, especially at the time, like seeing Jesus depicted in film by an actor, which, when they did Passion of the Christ, of course, Caviezel was Jesus in that film. Mm-hmm. But I think that was even controversial, right? So, I mean, was it a weird thing to show Jesus as a man, as somebody portraying him?
Yeah, isn't it? As far as I know, Christianity doesn't have the same kind of weirdness that Islam does with Muhammad, right? I mean, you can depict Christ, but like Daniel says in this film, they definitely went out of their way to not show his face. Is that just because they didn't want to? I don't know. You tell me.
Yeah, it's definitely intentional. But as far as a real reason why, I've never seen anything that someone, a director or cinematographer or an actor said, this is exactly why we're doing it. And I always took it as maybe a mix of both, where it's a little bit artistic of not putting a face to Jesus there. Um, but then also maybe um, taking into account that there are people who will have issues with that, and it isn't like Islam where there is a hard rule that there will not be any sort of depiction, but there are groups within Christianity that do consider even a picture of Jesus or a drawing or something, some sort of depiction of him as a violation of one of the commandments of a graven image, and so that is something. It's not as prominent as in the Islam, but it is something that I can imagine someone who comes from that perspective would appreciate that more in a movie like this.
Okay. And I also wonder if, similar to how when horror films used to be made more with, they show the violence off screen and they build the tension and the suspense before the payoff, that it was more it's always scarier in your head what you're imagining is going to happen than what they could portray on screen at the time. I mean, of course, now they can make things really grotesque and violently scary and all that, but I think filmmaking wise that it was a way to if you already have an envisionment of Jesus in your head, this movie's not going to change that. You're going to view your personal perspective of Jesus as the character in this, and in a way it might make it more real for the viewer.
That's the way I've always taken it. Ben-Hur, I believe, was similar. I've seen a few other movies where it's the story isn't actually, the gospel narrative, but it's a story like this where it's characters that are interacting and, within the gospel story, it kind of comes in and out of that. And that generally seems to be the way that it's portrayed, where you're not seeing, Jesus up close. You're not seeing the actor's face or anything. And I've always taken it more like that, of just not putting out that visual of who he is, not creating that visual.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
didn't what's his name? Dude, Jesus Christ Superstar, Daniel. And that was controversial at the time, right? For actually showing Jesus's face, or was it controversial for other reasons? I'm out of my depth here. I don't remember.
I've not even seen it, so I couldn't tell you. And I know there was another controversy around Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, I want to say, because that was a religious story too, right?
Yeah, I haven't
Yeah.
seen either of those, but the controversy I believe that's around Jesus Christ Superstar is that I, from what I understand, it does not hold to any of the biblical stories, the Gospels. It kind of goes off on its own thing, and I believe that there are inappropriate scenes for Christians and things like that are in the movie. So I think that those are the controversies that I've heard of. I hadn't heard of it being, having a depiction of Jesus in it.
Okay. Well, now this movie also diverges from the Gospels, right? I mean, this does not have any kind of biblical source material in it, right? Other than the crucifixion. But these characters are all unique, other than, I guess, per se, Peter, right?
Right.
And Caligula and Pontius Pilate, but
Right, it's a fictional story, and our main characters, they're fiction. As far as I know, they're fiction, and what it is that this movie, the story of the robe, it's not a biblical account, but it intersects with the gospel accounts, and as well as with the history, showing us the history that's more around the story that you also don't get from the biblical accounts.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Now, I wanted to go to you for we've already been talking for like half the show, but your reaction to what we've said and the Google description, and also if you could maybe suggest or why this was suggested.
Yeah, actually, I agree with most of, I mean, everything that's been said from the Google accounts and y'all's perspective. I agree. What I really like about the movie is I guess, the dating of the movie. I like watching that just personally. I love the big epic movies, and I think one a little bit in comparison to some of these other, like the Ten Commandments and stuff like that, is that it still has that big drama, sort of acting, but it seems to me a little bit subdued, a little bit more than some of the other ones that are real popular from this time period and these big epic films. And I think that it's possible because it was the first CinemaScope film that I think that they really did use the entire screen in a way that is still impressive and has a really good look to it. I mean, you have people moving from one side of the screen to the other, and you have a lot of people and a lot of scenery all in one scene and just completely taking up the entire space of your screen. And it looks great. Yeah, it's obvious that the backgrounds are painted. They did put together some really big sets with the columns and everything like that, and really impressive sets. And so just with all those things combined, I really enjoy looking at it. I enjoy these older movies, these older epic films, and then you combine that with what I thought was just top notch acting from some of the people. Um, even considering the time period and the style, that's really why this movie kind of stands out to me. And as well, just the story itself, I've already kind of mentioned how I like this sort of biblical movie where it's not necessarily a gospel account or a biblical story, but it's another story that's interacting and intersecting with the biblical accounts, and it's similar to Ben-Hur. That's another one that I really like, and I think that you get these really neat stories and these ways to express some of these things that were in the Bible or what we've taken away um, from the epistles that were written after, after the crucifixion of Jesus. And and that's what they've done with this movie as well, is that they've put a lot of these little things in there that watching it and being familiar with it, there's some references to hymns, as well as just some of the biblical accounts that are with Judas or Peter. And I really like seeing these stories, I guess, from that perspective, seeing the gospel accounts from that perspective, rather than just, you know, and there's nothing wrong with it, but making a movie of the narrative, of the gospel narrative. Um, there's something about this style of approaching it that I just really like.
Yeah, as familiar as I am with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's fun to see the biblical cinematic universe of the 40s and 50s, all the different characters interplaying and bigger and different stories taking place, but still in that same universe. It's a little bit different today. I don't know how many these kinds of biblical epics are getting made these days, if at all. I think Hollywood has changed quite a bit since those days. I maybe you've got some thoughts on that as to why. I think progressivism has really taken hold in politics and Hollywood, and I don't see these kinds of even Bible stories. I mean, it took Mel Gibson really to bankroll Passion of the Christ back in the day, right? Because I don't think any studios were really going to take a risk on it, or didn't really had a whole lot of interest in it.
I think it is a bit risky. Now, there is there's a whole world of Christian films that are made, directly to DVD. But you're not going to see a movie like this, and even from those studios that are putting out these kind of straight to DVD or straight to different streaming services that are catering toward Christian television and Christian movies. You're not going to see a big movie like this, and believe that they've talked about doing even a sequel to The Passion recently, but I do not know any details about that. Exactly, what story it's going to tell or anything. I have no idea. But yeah, this sort of biblical movies just are not popular. I'm sure they're risky for the studios. They need to know that they're risking millions and millions of dollars. They need to know they're going to put something out there that everybody wants to see. And I'm not. I know that there is a lot of money to be made in some of these smaller movies that these studios are putting out. Straight, like I said, straight to Christian streaming services and DVD. But I'm not aware of anything that's come out recently besides The Passion that was what you would call, an epic or a big budget movie.
Yeah, me neither. It's all been straight to DVD, like you said, or to like Redbox. You'll see a movie or here or there, but yeah, they just don't exist anymore.
Yeah, I remember watching the trailer for this one when you suggested it, Stephen, and it said the spectacle, cast of thousands. It was like super, super hypey. And but I was surprised to have never heard of it prior to your suggesting it. And it's kind of curious to me because if it did win a Golden Globe Best Picture and Richard Burton was a big deal. I mean, I only know Richard Burton from the Elizabeth Taylor stuff, Night of the Iguana, making Port Vallarta famous. I had never really seen any of his work. And I think when I first suggested, hey, let's do a movie, I was thinking 10 Commandments with Chuck Heston. And you're like, no, let's do Burton because he's a better actor. It kind of seemed kind of similar to me, like their style of acting. And I think that's just maybe the era. But it was super hypey. Yet today, I don't think anyone outside of maybe, Christian types would even know what this movie is at all.
Yeah, agreed. I can't remember when I first heard of this. I think it was just a VHS on somebody's shelf somewhere, sitting next to the 10 Commandments and the Passion DVD or something, and decided to watch it.
Okay, so this wasn't even like something like you were super familiar with. You kind of encountered it. You're like, hey, that would be a good one to do.
Yeah, I just kind of no, I had already seen it prior, and I really liked this movie. But when I first came across it, it wasn't because it was a household name or anything like that, And I think that the history around it with winning the Golden Globe and being nominated for the Academy Awards, and I want to say I bought the DVD a little while back, and it even has a kind of an intro with Martin Scorsese and talking about the CinemaScope and how much he liked this movie and how much of an impact that this movie had on him. I guess growing up, I'm not entirely sure where he when he saw this, but it's a bit of a historically significant movie when it comes to the history of filmmaking in those big studios back in the 50s, and even some of the new techniques that they were using at the time. And so just all of that stuff combined, I can't remember when I first ran across this movie, and but I watched it just having an interest in watching old movies, and I really liked it, and it'll be one that I kind of go back to from time to time. Just like I mentioned before, just it's the kind of story that I just really enjoy.
Yeah, and after watching it myself, I'm sort of the mind that like watching it the first time to kind of get the story maybe makes it feel longer. And if I were to watch it again, just to enjoy it, not to like, hey, I'm going to do a show about this, so it's like work,
like homework. Yeah,
yeah, I might actually like it more. I mean, I even in the sort of limited way I was watching it, over 3 nights and like trying to get some kind of kernel of things to talk about, I still noticed the use of the entire screen and the cinematography and the set pieces that were going on. And that was all really good stuff because you don't see that kind of thing anymore. And so it really did stand out. Now, some of it is because it's outdated, but some of it is like, hey, maybe they could bring some of that style back. Not all of it, but, you know, some of it. To kind of bring back a little bit of that narrative kind of telling, you know?
Yeah,
But,
because even with the Passion, you know, that one wasn't as I'm not real sure what the technical phrases would be, you know, but it's like that pulled back and very large scene with a lot of people in it. You didn't get, you know, it was you know, laid out like a traditional movie, a lot of good close-ups and stuff, but this sort of, you know, huge epic, you know, feel to it. Yeah, it would be super dated. I would like to see though if someone could try to pull it off and maybe create a movie like this, but you know, cutting out some of the cheese, you know, no doubt there's some, you know, some of that very loud acting and, you know, that's kind of stage like acting, you know, and maybe you know, update the style a little bit. That'd be nice to see.
yeah, maybe
Yeah.
get Wu to do the fight choreography instead.
Yeah, if I had to compare these two movies that we're talking about here, The Passion and The Robe, I would say the world building of The Robe is, I prefer that, superior. It's way better. Like you get a sense of this place that they're in. It's really grounded in that sense. And then in The Passion, I always felt like it was very intimate and you're always really close up, but I didn't get a sense of, you know, how big the world was. It was always, I don't know, either dark or cramped or close. It just had a different feel to it entirely. The two different movies. So I don't know. I'd like the acting of The Passion and the world building of The Robe. If you could meld those two, that'd be good.
Yeah. See, we got a winner. Some producer out there meld those two skills, those two features together, and you got a blockbuster. Oh, speaking of blockbusters, due to this COVID-19 stuff and Anarcho-Christian, Stephen, I got to commend you on your covering your mask, your face with the mask here.
Yes.
For safety purposes.
Yeah, I feel safer.
FEMA Region 6, and we're in FEMA Region 10. We are practicing safe social distancing here. But oh man, what the hell was I talking about? I was going to make some kind of quippy point. Son of a gun. It's gone. So gone.
Good.
Well, I do have a question. I know Caligula. I don't know much about him.
The guy that made his horse a general.
Yeah, so just the peripheral recollection of historical remembering I have is that he was a crazy guy, and he was sort of towards the back end of the Roman Empire. We're starting to get decadent and start collapsing, right? So, Robert, it sounds like you know a little bit more about it than I do. So he made his horse a general, but was he also like bloodthirsty crazy? I mean, they were all tyrants, right? But there were some that were more just, like we saw in Gladiator, the depiction of Marcus Aurelius. He was a decent dude. And then Joaquin Phoenix was psycho. It seems like maybe this sort of has a similar thing where the prior emperor in this movie, forget his name, but he seemed relatively...
Tiberius, I think, right?
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, he seemed relatively amenable. Like people could talk to him and he would make some sense, but he was definitely in charge. But then Caligula is like this whiny brat who is kind of a nut job. And he's like, if you disrespect me, which was my favorite part of the movie, by the way, at the very end, when what's her bucket is like, you're a tyrant, Caligula, your rule is unjust. And, you know, it was like this perfect little speech. And then she's like, all right, he's like, yeah, you're dead. You're going to go join Marcellus up the stairway to heaven there.
Yeah. Well, I hope I got that right with Caligula, the guy that made his horse a general. It's either him or Nero. Those are the two main Roman emperors that have not fared well to history. I want to say that it's pretty famous that the Roman aristocracy, mainly the emperors and the higher ups, all had like lead pipes So they all kind of went crazy due to lead poisoning over the years. So it's probably more and more rare the more sane ones, especially towards the end of the Roman Empire, I would say.
Okay, so you're saying because they lived in luxury, they were the 1%. They had these newfangled lead pipes to bring water running into their palaces, and that made them crazy.
They had running water in the Roman era, Daniel, with the aqueducts and lead pipes. These are huge technological innovations and feats of engineering that also made them crazy.
So back when Bernie was there, he was railing against the 1%, having all the pipes bringing in the water.
And what he didn't know was that they'd all be paying for it later. Well, the people of Rome paid for it, but yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So Caligula he's famously evil dude. He's definitely played up as the jabbering little demon villain in this movie for sure. He's not given a whole lot of nuance by this performance or by this script, but he's the cartoon villain. I don't think anybody's going to complain, except maybe Caligula himself, maybe.
Yeah, Caligula, as far as I know, was out of a lot of the Caesars was the most like deviant of the Caesars. That's kind of I guess something that's stuck with him throughout the years, and just bloodthirsty as far as killing the Christians and people that they threw into the Colosseum and stuff like that. I believe it was Caligula, and then I think that there was another one, and then Nero, I believe, after that. And I know that between those guys, there was a lot of bloodshed. And again, I think Caligula, one of the things that stood out to me was, I guess historically, he's remembered for his deviancy, kind of sexual deviancy that he had.
Now, wasn't there something about Nero and fiddling?
Well, Rome burned, yeah. Supposedly he ordered Rome
he burned it
to be burned, and
then blamed the Christians for it. I think Tacitus was a Roman historian or soldier. I can't remember, but he kind of documented that.
Okay, so he had his own Reichstag fire or Gulf of Tonkin situation. Remember the main. They've been doing these false flags for
it's
a long time.
It's old story.
Yeah.
It's like they get the playbook. All right, you know the playbook? All right, run this play.
Do some terrible thing and then blame it on your enemies.
Yeah, wow, geez. Now, their depiction, Stephen, of Jerusalem or Palestine being this kind of backwater shithole, for lack of a better term, does that seem, based on your understanding, like accurate? Like that's how they would have perceived it, as, hey, you're being sent to this like remote outpost where you're probably going to die. We're not sending our best.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the way that it's portrayed when you dig into the history books. The way that the Romans perceived this area. I think in the movie they do a really good job of having the Romans kind of set it up, and I think Marcellus is being introduced to the area by a Roman soldier that's there. And explaining that it's a backwater place and they're all superstitious, and just I think that this film did a really good job of giving us that sort of historical aspect of the Roman occupation of that area and the Roman mindset around being there, and just like we're talking about the Gulf of Tonkin and the kind of this timeless stuff, and when you look at the way that these soldiers, interact and the way that they feel about the natives and the locals, and they're this empire that's moved into this area, and, you can't help but just see, these sort of things just play out throughout all of history and all of time. And I think that they did a good job with kind of portraying that here in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They definitely get the sense that these Romans feel like this is all beneath themselves. Like, I'm used to Rome. I'm one of these civilized folk, and these barbarians, what am I doing here?
Mm-hmm. And they get
hillbillies.
Yeah, they get sent out there. They got to do their time, do their service, however many months or a year out there, and then they'll get to go back to Rome, and that sort of thing. So I think it's an interesting thing, and where we, like I said, we look back and we just kind of see the same thing play out. Like, this is what empire does, and this is what it looks like.
Yeah, and it was also interesting to see them get called out on it. Like, hey, you think you're the civilized ones, but you're over here being barbaric to us.
Mm-hmm.
I forget who says it to her. Is it the girl who says it to Caligula? She's like, hey, you're being no, it was somebody earlier when they were trying to like stop the Roman attack on the village. I want to say there was somebody who called them out on they think they're so civilized, but they're the ones being tyrants. They're the ones being barbaric.
I think so. Was it when they were trying to round up the Christians and stuff? I think
before the guys got shot with arrows.
And I think it might have happened in there. I don't remember.
Right before that big sword fight scene.
Yeah, it's all fuzzy. I don't know which of the 3 nights it was that I was watching it, but I do remember that happening where it's like, yeah, no, you're actually the uncivilized barbarian. You're the one over here messing with us. You're the one over here committing violent acts. And that was a good call out, and like you were saying, there are similarities to today. A lot of people will compare the United States to the Roman Empire, especially during the decline. That phase of it where they're like extending their power worldwide and it's starting to wane, and there's also all this like social degeneracy going on. There was a really good article that came out. It was in RT, so it's probably got Putin's name all over it, right? Russia Today. It was talking about how in the West, there's decadence of the past 20, 30, 40 years has kind of led to this precipice that we're on, and this coronavirus thing might be pushing us over that edge. So I'll put that on our show notes page because I thought it was a really interesting read. So you find that at lastnerds.com/119. Let me know what you guys think. We welcome your comments, everyone, all audience members. Reach out to us on our Facebook pages or whatever you got, because we like to be challenged occasionally, right, Robert? Sometimes.
Supposedly you were challenged recently. You mentioned that you had a good back and forth with some people on Twitter, but I don't really partake of the twits much lately, so I missed it.
Oh man, I'm terrible at the tweeting. Like, I can't follow a thread because he kept adding me, like sending like things at me, and I was like replying to them, but then they're not in the same conversation. It's like all over the place. So I don't know. But
so he wasn't doing it right, or you weren't doing it right?
I'm gonna say I wasn't because I'm not familiar, but I can tell you that I responded to everything he said, and he
was not satisfied with your answers, Daniel?
He stopped responding. So maybe I'm blocked. I don't know.
That's part of the victory, right? He's going to go home and think about it.
Yeah, and I even direct messaged him, and it was like, "Hey, thanks for the conversation. I'm going to be going to bed soon, but if you want more information on this, here's a good link." Blah blah blah. Because he watched our Contagion episode, and he was like, "You guys aren't sufficiently calling out Trump for his denial of science and all this stuff." I'm like, "Dude, we recorded that on February 25th. We're a movie review show." And
what does Trump have to do with Contagion? I guess if we reviewed it yesterday, then we would be talking about Trump's reaction to the coronavirus. Is that what he wants us to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, during that episode. Sorry, Stephen. We'll let you finish here. But, but we were talking about Contagion as it related to events surrounding coronavirus. But that was back when it was still in China, and we were talking about like things happening in China. And it was also back when Fauci was saying to the American public, "Don't worry, it won't affect us." And CDC was saying, "Oh, don't worry about wearing masks. It's ineffective. It won't help you anyway." And then, of course, they backtrack on that. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on around this. But basically, he was dissatisfied with our lack of calling out Trump for things he hadn't yet done, apparently.
Well, in his defense, we are the worst. That is true. So he's right about that.
We are the worst. Anarcho-Capitalist movie review show on the planet, also the best.
This is true. We're both the worst and the best. But it does annoy me. If that's his take on it, that really is annoying that, whether the country somehow lives or dies is due to the inaction or action of a political party. I would say due to action is far worse than inaction.
Yeah, I'd agree. And there were a few criticisms, and I answered all of them. So if you can figure out how to read Twitter, you can check it out yourselves. I'll put a link on our show notes page so people can view it. Because I'd love to somebody explain to me how this thing works. Anyway, back to the show.
He's an old man and he doesn't understand.
I do have my new holster, the Urban Carry 3 G3 Generation 3. I love it. I've been wearing it every day since I got it, and it allows me to have an alleged firearm on me legally. It doesn't provide the legality, but I do have the legal paperwork. Papers, please.
You got the permission papers.
I got the permission
your daddy.
But I will say that it does allow me to carry it far more conveniently, comfortably, and without worry of it being discovered, as compared to the IWB carrier that I had in the past, that's an inside waistband for all you non-gun nerds. It goes on your hip, and if you don't wear baggy enough clothing, you risk it being displayed and visible by the public. So I will recommend to people two things. Number one, if you're interested, go to the link, lastnighters.com/G3, sign up for their loyalty program first, and then make a purchase, because then that purchase will then award you points for money off future purchases. I made the mistake of ordering before signing up. So then I had to go through customer service rigmarole to get the credit to then use it for other stuff. Anyway, this is my ham-fisted attempt at recommending a product for you guys that you will enjoy because I enjoy it, and we will earn a very, very small commission at no additional cost to you, my friends. Now back to the show.
Seamless ad placement, Daniel. Good job. I didn't even notice. Was there an ad, or is it this is a conversation we were just having?
We were just talking. Just three guys talking.
Just three guys talking. Wow. We're
All
really
right.
good at this.
All right, so I'm going to segue us back into the show. Did you know that the lone surviving cast member from this film is very famous? He was in Spinal Tap. He was also numerous voices on The Simpsons. Can you name that person?
Oh, shit.
Yes.
Be on Jeopardy right here.
Anarcho-Christian got the answer.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Buzzing in. It is the crippled boy that they meet in the town, and he gives the donkey to.
You are correct, but I'm going to need
Wow.
a name, sir, and in the form of a question, please.
Oh, yeah. The name of the actor, I do not remember. It is the bass player for Spinal Tap, though. I remember that.
Yeardley Smith.
Nope.
It's Mr. Burns, though.
And Smithers.
Yeah.
And Ned Flanders.
Yeah, he does 10 voices, I think.
And Troy McClure, I think.
Dan Castellana.
Nope. Try again. It's the next person you're going to guess.
I don't know if I can think of another name on Simpsons. It's not the guy that did Apu, because that's another guy. I got nothing.
Quality content here, everyone. My friend. .com/119. Show notes some more. It's Harry Shearer. So he was David, the crippled boy who was healed, which I think was the only miracle in the film, really. I mean, the other things that were witnessed by Marcellus, and I'll direct this towards you, Stephen, were this woman who was very, she was also crippled, I think, or something. She had some kind of illness where she was lame, and she was very bitter about it. And then she talked to Jesus, and Jesus was like, turn that frown upside down, be happy. And she was thankful for having the life that she could have, and she was singing and all of this. And then the other act was of charity, because David gave the donkey that was given to him, and according to Marcellus, that donkey represented great wealth. It was probably the most prized thing that David had ever received in his life, and he willingly gave it to another without a second thought.
Yeah, the woman that he talked to, that Marcellus talked to, that was also crippled, and I think that this was intentional, having these two different characters, so that he has this sort of conversation and interaction with someone who is healed, which is, of course, a big part of Jesus's story. And as we're sort of the audiences, we're introduced to some of these things about Jesus, and through his interactions, through Marcellus's interactions with the Christians, as he's looking for his runaway slave. And so then we see this sort of this story, kind of the two stories of the two crippled people, kind of against each other, where the little boy is healed and then the woman that he talks to is not. And it is really cool to see this sort of conversation play out, because there are incorrect assumptions within Christianity that once you do believe in Jesus, then you're going to be healed. So it is interesting to see this portrayed in a movie that correctly portrays that, and kind of corrects that misconception as well.
Okay, yeah, it does make sense that there's that polarization of those two outcomes from similar situations, and that they want to kind of show both angles of it. And then also the charity one, that's less a miracle, but more a demonstration of the Christian ethic to Marcellus, who's like discovering what these people are really about, that they are actually not just these backwater, barbaric people, and maybe he's discovering that what he's doing is actually wrong. And then I do take back that there were no other miracles. There is another miracle in this, and that is Demetrius's recovery from being tortured to near death. Because the doctor comes in and he's like, nothing I can do. Sorry, he's not going to make it. And then they have him leave the room, and Demetrius recovers a bit, and then like sorcery, and turns him in, which is kind of the downfall to Marcellus's situation.
Yeah. And I think that the way that this film portrayed these sorts of miracles that happened either through the people talking about what happened with Jesus, because we don't see any of that play out with Jesus. He's shown very, very few times throughout the movie. We see him enter in. I think Marcellus arrives to Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, and we see that sort of that entrance. And then we see the crucifixion take place, a few days later. And the showing of the and they didn't really show it, right? They left the room, but this healing that took place, post Jesus's death, with the disciple, this is all stuff that is very well documented in the biblical accounts. And that's just another thing that I know I've referenced back to a few times, this idea of this story of how did people see those events that we it can even come to take for granted in the biblical accounts, and maybe they end up sort of feeling like a myth or a fable, because they take place within the Bible and within Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. But the way that they're able to show it from this perspective in the movie, adding bringing these stories back out into what we could call like real history, right? Because like I said, I think that we do tend to sort of look at the Bible as something separate from what I'll call real history. And this movie sort of brings out those miracles and these people, with Peter, brings it into real history.
Yeah, the reference to Peter, I was familiar with his denying Jesus 3 times. I think that was even brought up in Passion of the Christ, wasn't it? Where he was like, "There's no way I'll deny you," and then of course he does.
Yeah. That's when it happens, right? Is right there before Jesus is crucified, and this movie sort of taking place at that same time, but from someone else. Like if it were happening at the same time that we were watching Passion of the Christ, Marcellus in this movie, he's off in his house somewhere else, getting that call from Pilate to come and crucify Jesus, but he wasn't around for the arresting, for the trial, or anything like that. So it's kind of interesting, if you try to maybe picture these movies in a timeline, of a historical timeline. Where was Marcellus during this, when Peter was denying Christ, and then fast forward a little bit in the Robe, he's meeting Peter later, and Peter's telling him what happened that night.
Yeah, do a mashup of the two.
Yeah.
or get Tarantino on it, and maybe make Marcellus Wallace, to look like a bitch. Oh man. So yeah, I think that was pretty interesting, and the actor who played Peter was Michael Rennie, who was the guy Klaatu, I think, in the Day the Earth Stood Still, which is a good segue, Robert, for what we're going to be next week.
Is it?
Dr. Dennis Foster was on last year doing The Day the Earth Stood Still with us. He's going to be on next week with us doing Soylent Green.
Oh,
which is going to be
I hear.
Yeah, and it was going to be our Earth Day special, but now it's just going to be like it's probably what people are going to be eating in a few weeks if this lockdown keeps up. But anyway, we are getting close to the end of the show. So are there any other notes that either of you guys have? And then we'll get into summary and review.
Well, it wouldn't be an episode of this podcast if I didn't try to talk a little bit about economics. And there was at least one economic scene in the film. I'm sure you guys noticed it as well. So when Marcellus is talking to the emperor and he sends him back to Jerusalem, to try and lift this curse that this robe has been placed upon him, he goes back and he starts buying up all these robes for well over market price. And he's totally fine with it. He even says a man not cheated when he is satisfied with the price. But there's this old kind of wise man kind of guy who comes in and he's like, shame on you people for taking it. What's that?
Justice is his name. Yeah.
So he comes along and kind of interferes with these voluntary transactions and says, this is a crime that's being committed, but it's by you people selling him your goods for way above market price. So I, as a voluntarist, was like, what are you talking about? And I'm going to ask Stephen here, what was this guy talking about?
Yeah, it's not that there was any problem with the voluntary transactions, but we're in this town where this is happening. This is a Christian community, right? We see the whole town come together to listen to a song sung about Jesus. This is a Christian town, and what he was scolding them for was this obvious taking advantage of him. Of the guy that's selling of Marcellus buying the robes. At least that's what I took from it, is this idea of just taking advantage of him. And that's something that I know in Christianity there is some I guess kind of arguments about where do you draw the line on usury and things like that. But what I took away from that was the scolding of the kind of intentionally taking advantage of a guy with willing to pay the extra money above market price.
Now, because he could tell that Marcellus was distraught or had a bunch of issues going on. Because otherwise, what business is it of his what rate he wants to buy robes at? Like, it's obviously satisfying some desire of his. And the money he doesn't value as much as he values the robes. So is it because he could sense that this guy has all his marbles?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it's even necessarily to really protect Marcellus necessarily, but just to tell those people, there's so much in Christianity and what we understand and what we learn, the heart motive of things, right? So the heart motive of them selling these things, and taking advantage of this man, with the money, I think that's where I kind of came away from it. Kind of scolding them, for taking advantage of him.
Because he succeeds, and the people are all kind of ashamed, and they walk away.
Yeah, some of them kind of give him a look like, I'm not happy about this. I'm gonna. They give him back the money, and they're not very happy.
I'll take a stab at this, Robert. I actually I agree with Justice's interceding here. He's not doing it by force. He's using social pressures and market mechanisms to indicate to the people like, hey, you should be ashamed of yourselves because you know you're taking advantage of this guy. Also,
Do they though?
yeah, they do. They do feel shame as a result of it, as depicted in the film. And I think that they know
How-
that he's overpaying. It's
How
pretty.
do they know?
It's pretty.
How do
obvious.
they know? How do they know what's in his heart? What if they're selling this thing that is making his life complete? That he just, oh man, all I need is this rough spun robe, and then I'll be the happiest person in the world. I'll pay whatever price. I don't even care. I'm taking the sucker for only giving 2 gold pieces, and I'm like making out like a bandit.
Right, but the real situation was he was using stolen money, and he had unlimited amounts of it. It was blood money from the Roman emperor, used to buy influence into a community, to make a show of all this money raining down, to get inroads into outing those very same people as Christians so that they could be marked down for death.
Wait a minute, is that what really was happening in that scene?
Yeah, he's there to get people's name on this list. He's making a Schindler's List, but the opposite of Christians to be persecuted.
I know that's why he originally goes there, but I thought that he was really just trying to find the robe.
No, I think that he was using that ploy to get all the robes brought to him, but also to get this side quest, Boogaloo side quest, of getting all these people's names to be given to the emperor to be killed. Because he knew what the robe looked like. So he knew if he made a big enough show by overpaying, that people would bring all of the robes, even the ones most dear to them, such as Jesus's robe that he wore while dying on the cross. So I think that he knew that he was overpaying, and he was doing so purposefully to meet his ends.
So then justice was wrong.
Well, justice was right and wrong. They were taking advantage of him because they were selling something to somebody they knew were overpaying, but
they were being suckers. They're getting sold out.
Yeah, but they don't know that part, and neither does justice. What they know is that they're overselling, or they're selling for a higher price than they would have normally expected because this guy was willing to buy it. They didn't realize it was a trap. So justice actually saved them to a degree.
Unwittingly.
Okay.
I'll buy that series of events right there. I'll buy that interpretation. I can see the blood money, the blood tax money. I can see that angle for sure. And I didn't see Marcellus making a list of anybody. I didn't see him getting their names or anything like that. But I could see him that being the very first part of some kind of undercover operation where you're going to be then let into this underworld of Christians and then finding out more about them and the attempt to destroy them.
It's the big splash to get notoriety in there. And also, hopefully someone will show you that robe because that's what you're looking for ostensibly. But Tiberius knew that Marcellus was crazy. Like as soon as he sends him on his mission to find the robe, this cursed robe, he's like, that robe's not cursed. I didn't send him there to find that. I found him to get this list of Christians.
There's a little more to this movie than I thought. Okay, right on. Good deal.
All right. Tell me when I'm wrong, Stephen. Is this your interpretation as well? I thought that they're sending Marcellus under this supposed quest for the robe.
I think it's a good point.
Really, the quest is get into these Christians and report back to me so I can crush them.
I think it's a good point. Yeah, it's not necessarily laid out, but he knows what that robe looks like, right? And going there and flashing all that money around, these people are very willing to come out and say, that they're Christians, that and also he is trying to find the other robe and trying to find Demetrius, his runaway slave, and what's a faster way to get people to open up to you than to flash all that money around and pay way too much for the robes.
And much like a stimulus package today, they're getting paid with their own money.
Right. Yeah. $1,200 today. That's $1,000.
It's a cash for clunkers, right? For the robe, buying those robes back.
Oh man, I thought that was a bad deal. This is so much worse. But anyway, very good point, and I think that was like probably the best discussion we've had in quite some time. So thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Robert. So any final notes before we do final summary review?
No, Daniel, let's go ahead and let's wrap this bad boy up. But I want to thank Stephen for coming on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you guys having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you. Everyone's appreciating each other. We're having an appreciation circle jerk there. Happy Easter, everyone. No, yeah, we're not like a kid-friendly show. So I'll kick us off here. So this movie, I had not heard of it until a few months ago when I was like, hey, Stephen, let's have you back on. Let's do another Easter show. I was thinking 10 Commandments, and you were like, Chuck Heston's great, but Burton's even better. So let's do that. No disrespect to Mr. Heston. And I got to say, I was glad that you suggested this. This was actually a pretty good movie. And yeah, it is dated in a lot of ways, but there's also some kind of scenery that you like. There's some of it that's a bit nostalgic, and you almost long to have some of this back into cinema again. And I'm glad that I saw it. I don't think I would have seen it had you not recommended it. I've never heard of it prior to this. And it's kind of surprising because it did win awards. It was the first movie in CinemaScope. It had Richard Burton, who was a big deal back in the day. And I wonder if there's some reason why this isn't more known. I mean, the Ten Commandments is known, Ben-Hur is known, Spartacus is known, and those are all from a similar era. So I just don't understand why this one didn't get put in that same strata. Watching it, I mean, it seems pretty good. I'm probably going to like upgrade this from what I was going to give it. So I'm going to go with 7.5 on this. I would recommend that people watch this. It's a fun movie. So we'll go to Robert, and then we'll go to Stephen for your score and summary.
Well, fun is not a word I would use to describe this movie. Even though I liked our discussion a lot, I mean, I didn't like laugh or anything or even smile when I was watching the film. It's definitely got an interesting story. I like the story aspect. I mean, you're talking about this Roman, almost a senator, like not quite a senator, but almost a senator guy.
Senator's son.
Senator's son, but he also is an elected dude.
Tribune.
Like tribune. Yeah, tribune. There, I guess there's some kind of, he's part of the governmental structure. Let's put it that way. And he's sent to this backwater, and he partakes in this execution, and the guilt he feels over it by meeting these, he has this life-changing event, meeting these caring, loving, giving people. And it's so opposite to the world he knows, other than the love of this woman back in Rome for the most part. And his path to ultimately denying the state, which is something I thought we were going to talk about. We ended up just briefly mentioning it a little bit. I thought we were going to mostly focus on that last scene.
Yeah,
we didn't.
Too. That was like the scene that I thought was like the scene to make this a movie for us.
Yeah, that scene was the signature Last Nighters scene for that movie, where they basically tell Caligula, no, sorry, buddy, you've got a king too. And Caligula's like, what? You have another king? Heresy, basically. And they're like, nope, sorry, man, you're no good. I'm out. And they peace out, and they walk off to heaven. It's which I think, those characters in that scene, and this is one of the things I love about religion. There's a lot of things I don't like about religion, good and bad things with all things in the world. But one of the main things I love about it is the fact that they hold something higher than the state. They hold God, Jesus, whatever your deities are, above the creations of mankind. And that's above the state. Thankfully, somebody, I wish more Christians were active in that they've just like, whatever these government people say, it's whatever, but it's not up here with my religion stuff.
Yeah, it seems to be a lot of the religion has been co-opted by state worship now.
Mhm.
Yeah, a lot of people throw like Romans, what is it, 7:13, whatever it is. I
Romans
forget.
13, yeah.
Yeah, they throw that around. Like Romans Christians should listen to the government and render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, that kind of thing.
Yeah, just
Um,
taking those things, out of context and building in what, really what you see today with Christianity just so intertwined with the state.
Yeah, and if I
Yeah.
recall, we got into that a fair amount in our discussion last year on Passion of the Christ. So I'll suggest people listen to that because we talk about Romans 13 and this whole intermixing of religion and state and the co-opting a fair amount in that one, if I recall.
Yeah, it's really another trick of government to really supersede themselves over religion and religion's folks. And it's refreshing to see it in this movie where people the characters take a principled stand at the end. And they make an actual rational decision to go off and die rather than, I mean, it's rational to them in the moment. I mean, I'd probably run away, but you know what I mean? Like they're actually denying Caesar and actually saying something true to him. And he just can't have that. That's just anathema to this political bureaucrat guy who
I found Marcellus actually pretty compelling. He's like, hey, you don't need to be a tyrant. You could join us and everything would be better. But yeah, he's like, no.
He's like, no, not in my world, buddy. So yeah, I think the movie ends in a fantastic way. I really appreciated that. It resonated with me as atheistic as I am. But the film itself, I've seen too many movies, man. I'm just this old jaded guy who has seen way too many movies. And there are some things about this film that are kind of fun to see, for sure. The big scenes of like the bazaar with all the people and the things going on. It's like the coordination and all those extras and the costume design and the set design and all the matte paintings. So were actually seemed really well done. I'm sure if you got up real close, they'd probably lose their detail, but for what it was, I think it was quite well done, especially for the time. But for me, it just doesn't age very well. And the storytelling style, I'm sure you could redo this movie today. Well, Hollywood today wouldn't redo it. But if you had redone it today, you could tell it in a different style. And I think it would be much more appealing to a modern audience. And I would give it a higher rating. But for what it is, for me, it's like a 6. It was just too slow that it bored me. But certain elements did resonate. The story was good. The acting, even though it was done in that style, I could see it was decent. But yeah, a 6 from me. I would recommend it if you're interested in this sort of thing. But I don't think it's gonna, take off with any kind of like modern audience. So.
All right. Thank you for that, Robert. And Stephen, over to you for your final summary and your score 1 to 10. Go a decimal point or however many you want deep. We're playing fast and loose here.
Well, I'm glad that we did bring up that final scene because it is a significant moment in the movie. It isn't just oh, you're a Christian and you're going to be put to death just because we don't like Christians. We see this trial and we see this complete rejection of the state. And it's very straightforward. And so that's something that I really do enjoy about this movie, and it makes it very relevant to the things that we're all doing here. So, and I think that I've said it from the start, that I love this movie. I love all the historical aspects of it as far as filmmaking, just the grand scenes and the cinemascope and all of that, as well as the real history that we see with all of the interactions that we see with the characters that we are familiar with already with the Bible, and with Peter and Judas and and the Roman occupation, everything in the story. I just from a historical perspective, I thought that they were right on. looks great. It sounds great. You've got, like you said, you've got horses, horse chases. You've got a love story. The rejection of the state there at the end. All of this historical context, and I love this movie. I would recommend it to anyone, from film student to someone who's interested in maybe a Christian perspective of martyrdom, but obviously from a perspective of knowing that this is a fictional story. It's not a biblical account, and any of the superstitions that are talked about, around the robe as being sort of this centerpiece that kind of drives part of the story. It's not biblical, but I think that we can still enjoy it, and we can still get a ton out of this movie. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go way high with a 9 on this film. I think that there's so much that so. That's
all right,
it.
if you could
I'm gonna
repeat
go with
the last sentence just one more time, because I think it broke up a little bit. What was the last sentence you said?
That I'm going to go big with the score on this one, and that is a 9. I'm going to recommend this film at a 9, just considering all of the history involved in in the movie making process, as well as the history that's portrayed with the biblical narratives and in that time period. It's a great movie.
All right. Well, pretty strong defense. And I think our conversation pulled me up from probably being close to down where Robert was on his score, but a pretty good variety. So we have some contention on the show tonight, everyone. That usually makes one of our better shows. And we've done 119 of these now for the Last Nighters. So this is, of course, found at lastnighters.com/119. You can find our guests stuff over at Anarcho-Christian.com, and also look out for his interview on Blast Off with Johnny Rocket and Raylene Lightheart. We will have Raylene on in a few weeks, but coming up next week, we're going to be doing Soylent Green with Dr. Dennis Foster, who was last with us a year ago doing The Night the Earth Stood Still, or The Day the Earth Stood Still. It's nighttime here, so I'm all confused, and I'm old, senile, run for president, or am I? I don't know. But Michael Rennie was Peter in this movie, and he was Klaatu in The Day the Earth Stood Still. So we have a nice segue into that. And we have the Richard Burton versus Chuck Heston back-to-back double feature going on. So that will be what we're doing next week. Again, Anarcho-Christian, our guest, Anarcho-Christian.com and all that. Check us out on lastnighters.com/119 for show notes, and hit us up on Patreon for our bonus content, affectionately called Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which we'll be doing right after our final messages here from Robert, who always has a nice way of signing us off with ways you can support the show.
Well, yeah, you can get together and you can violate social distancing and talk about the show. You could follow social distancing, but I mean, you're not going to win bonus points with me. I don't really care. I mean, you live your life and you accept risks. That's part of our jobs as human beings, is to determine risk. And the successful ones survive, and the unsuccessful ones see an early grave. And so far, most of us are doing a pretty good job. And so I'm sure you're well aware of the risks out in the world. So anyway, yeah, you could do that. You can leave a review. You can interact with us on Facebook, on Twitter. Apparently, some of us get on Twitter sometimes. You can support us on Patreon. That's probably the biggest thing, is when the rubber meets the road and you actually give us, Federal Reserve fiat notes for some reason. That really excites us.
Yeah, send us your Trump bucks, everyone.
I'm sorry, what, Daniel?
Send us some of those Trump bucks.
Yeah, Trump bucks. Those are good. But you could buy a t-shirt on Trumpster.com, or a sticker, or anything else like that. You can subscribe to us on the Apple Podcast. You can leave a review, any kind of interaction, positive review, negative review. You can talk about how our ideas are all terrible and unworkable.
That's one of our most frequent reviews.
It's good times, man. So yeah, and then we'll see you next week with eating people, because
spoilers. Jeez.
Yeah, sorry. future dystopian film, right? I don't know. When does it take place? Does it take place like
2 weeks.
in 1990 or something, some far-flung distant future?
It actually had a meme that had like all the dystopian sci-fi on a timeline, and Soylent Green's on there. I think it's like just a few years ago, but it seems like it might be in just a few weeks. A few short weeks now, if we don't get over this flatten the curve hype and all that. Stephen, thank you again for being our guest. I hope you can stick around for some of the bonus content. And if you'd like to have any final message for our Last Night's audience, now is step up to the mic, my man.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed it last year, enjoy it again this year, and hopefully we can do it again. If anybody's interested in reaching out to me, you can do it through the website, Anarcho-Christian.com, or any of the social media pages. We're on there. Just, send me a note about, anarchism, Christianity, the movie, whatever you'd like. Be happy to talk.
All right, very good. Well, we will say good night from last night. Happy Easter, everyone. Peace out. All right, and before we get into that Kathleen Turner Overdrive, we're going to do just a few more minutes on the Actual Anarchy podcast. It's a show within the show concept, probably a failed concept, but I keep doing it. I think that's the definition of insanity. Am I right, Robert?
Yes, that's correct, sir. You are definitely having mental problems, not just the old-timers disease that Joe Biden suffers from.
I can tell you this. I have not yet dropped out of the presidential race for the 2020 nomination. I also have not joined the race. So technically I have not dropped, and that is true. But anyway, I usually try to save something for this final portion.
You always do. You always got some interesting question that somehow doesn't get addressed during the regular show.
Yeah, now I feel like I'm on the spot, so I don't really have anything. But I was curious, because we're not yet in the bonus content, I want to address this a little bit with just the current pandemic and the usurpation of all the supposed rights that we have, that the Constitution Bill of Rights are supposed to protect, because they are bestowed upon us not by the state, but by our Creator, or as a basis of our humanity. And that they're violating all of these rights consistently and a near totality. It's like a de facto martial law situation. And I was just curious what your perspective on it was, Stephen, because I know what Robert's perspective on it is, and I know what mine is.
Well, in the defense of the authoritarian overlords, somebody did get sick. So,
yeah.
Well, what are you going to do? You got to crack down. You got to crack some heads, right?
Right. You got to show everybody who's boss and let them know that, our rights come from government and they can take it away as fast as they can give it to us, But yeah, I am a complete Spooner, fan. And, once we do start talking about the Constitution, I'm just right there with the unfit to exist, position, because I like talking about it. I like learning about it. I'm a big history nerd. And I think it's really helpful to point out how the government does overstep its own rules that supposedly is holding it back.
And
I think
the arbiter of those rules. So
yeah, I think it's a great conversation to have. And I always want to encourage people to learn the Constitution for that purpose. But when it comes to, why or how or anything, well, hey, I'm right there with the Spooner thing. It's either created this or it's powerless to stop it, and otherwise it's unfit to exist.
Yeah, absolutely right. And all the people that signed it are dead, so you're not beholden.
Yeah, they can create a contract that just locks in millions of people to come after them. It's just
in perpetuity because they happen to be born in a particular place.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, so I know our show is already getting a little long because the discussion on the film was so good, and we can probably continue some of this question I'm about to ask in the Kathleen Turner Override, available for our Patreon supporters. So, pay money for the real good stuff. We gave you just a taste so far, but you got to pay for the rest. But Stephen, what do you see kind of as the result of this? Like, we still don't know the end, right?
Right.
Extending things, but there's nothing so permanent as a temporary government measure or a temporary emergency. I think that's a Heinlein quote. So a lot of these usurpations are going to stick around. It's the Robert Higgs Ratchet effect. Like, they're going to take all of this drastic steps, and then when things kind of cool down, they'll back off a little bit, but they'll always have more power than they had prior to the crisis. And as Rahm Emanuel, of course, famously said, you never want to let a good crisis go to waste. So they're using this to give cover for a lot of advancement of policies and ideas and pet projects and things that they've wanted for a whole long time. This $2 trillion stimulus package had tons of pork in it, up and down, $25 billion for the Kennedy Center, all these other things all across the board. And you can just imagine that this thing was sitting there waiting to get shoved into some bill just to get their things advanced and passed under the guise of an emergency.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even know where I'm going with this question, but what do you see happening as the direct aftermath, and how do we, as advocates for liberty, who are enormously outnumbered, way more outnumbered than I thought we were, like, so many people are the brown shirts right now, turning people in for the most inane stuff.
Yeah,
and
the snitching and
yeah, I thought there was some American backbone, some streak of liberty in there. Still, it's fucking dead. I mean, it is dead. I don't know. We're less than a 1% minority. I gotta think. I thought we were maybe 5% of people like amenable to the ideas of liberty and freedom, or at least paid lip service to it. But that seems to be a high estimate at this point.
Daniel, before Stephen answers, you break up a really interesting point. I mean, you're talking about all this pork that had to just be sitting around, right? They didn't just come up with this at the last minute, and the Kennedy Center came out with this desperate plea for assistance. It had to be like, there had to be a meeting where all these senators get together, and they're like, all right, pull out your pork files, and everybody just throw them in a pile in the middle, and then we'll slap together and we'll put a new face on it, and we'll call it a bill. And we'll call it like the coronavirus relief bill or whatever, right? That had to be in a meeting where that happened, right? I mean, how else do these things get done?
Send us all your stuff. Just throw everything in. We're just building a big bonfire.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we saw after 9/11 too. You know, the Patriot Act, it didn't just spring up immediately overnight because of some sort of sense of, oh, we've got to create these giant bureaucracies and and remove people's liberty for our own safety. You know, that stuff was sitting around, written or half written, just waiting for these events, right? And to not let these crises go to waste, however you say that. But it's I think that we're seeing the same thing play out, and I wish I was more optimistic here. I'm right there with you. I think we're seeing the results of just the lip service to liberty show itself, after, years and years, post 9/11, we see these events happen, and just like what you're explaining, it is going to go back to normal, but there's going to be something there that's going to be left there, whether it's the TSA or, the inflation of the dollar, or nationalizing, businesses or something, something is going to be left there. And not to mention, we've all seen how this kind of soft rollout for a martial law will happen, and how far they can get with it, and what it would take. And unfortunately, it's not much. It doesn't take much to turn neighbors, snitching on neighbors. These guys are having a party with more than 10 people, in their backyard, and cops breaking them up, and people are calling for it. That's what's been just so appalling to me. It isn't that the state's doing it. I expect the state to do this sort of thing, but the fact that there is what appears to me a strong majority of everyone, demanding that this happen. And that's just what's blown me away.
Yeah, it reminds me of Fahrenheit 451, where it's the people asking to be protected from being offended that results in the firemen burning all all the books and literature. It's the people demanding their own incarceration. It's maddening.
Mhm.
And it's just, man, I just don't even know how to put this into words, but like, it just demonstrates how far outnumbered we are and how far we have to go to have any hope for overcoming this, because it seems like a lost cause at this point. Like, your best bet is really just kind of agorism at this point, like become so insulated as you can to be as least affected by the state as possible, because the 2012 Ron Paul movement, as exciting as that was, it's like the opposite end of that spectrum right now for me.
It also shows how far we have yet to go with the usurpation of the mainstream media and how effective they still are at stoking fear with among our neighbors and our friends and relatives. I mean, I'm sure everybody knows somebody who's freaking out about this. And if people are calling cops on their neighbors for having a little get together or something, it's like, these people, these are people that never think it'll be used against them, and that they're actually doing a good thing. They've been so conditioned to believe that if I call the cops on these people, not only am I protecting myself, good things are going to happen, and I'm protecting those people because they are doing something bad against everybody else.
I mean, how many times did people call the cops for a welfare check and then they end up shooting the person they were doing the welfare check on, I mean, I'm sure it's anecdotal, but those are the stories you see. And it's like, well, wait, you were supposed to make sure this guy was okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just one more excuse after the next, though. We look at it just from a completely outsider's perspective, and when you're locked in and conditioned, as you're saying, it's one excuse after the next. It's for their own good, or they should have obeyed and no one would have gotten hurt. There's you can go all day with those same phrases, just that people use in defending, the police overstepping and overreaching of the government and everything like that. It blows me away that we are where we are, where, there always has been such a culture of liberty, but it seems to be only in rhetoric,
Yeah, rhetoric, and when you push it just a little bit, you can get people just a little bit frightened.
And just a little bit is really the takeaway here. It did not take very much.
This is like the weakest pandemic crisis of all time. I mean,
we wouldn't know
I don't
that.
want to downplay the number of people who've died, but when you compare it to like the 1919 flu, it's like nothing.
Yeah, well, they talk about it like it's a huge deal, and they're juicing the stats. I mean, they've admitted to that as much. There's all these fake news stories that have come out where they're using footage from Italy and pretending it's New York. There was one, this is a coronavirus dying on a table, and it's a dummy. It's ridiculous, and it's all fear mongering. It's all part of this vicious circle of reinforcement of each other's leg. You got the pharmaceutical companies and the MSM. In the ad rev, and then the politicians who are more than willing to accept all this additional power grab that they're allowed to have. It all self-reinforces, and it's really just kind of an awful thing to see. And we need to wind down the actual anarchy portion of the show, but I will end with this. I will say that I will go out on a limb and say that this will end up being less than a 1% mortality rate. It'll be no worse than a bad flu, and that this will all, in retrospect, to those willing to see a giant overblown reaction where we're killing the economy, which is
there will be no apology. There will be no apology. Just like there was no apology with the internet. You know what I'm talking about? The internet thing, Daniel. Come on, help me. My old man brain. I'm having a Biden moment. Net neutrality. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel. Just like there's no apology for neutrality, there's no apology here. Go ahead. Sorry.
All right, and not only will there not be an apology, there will not be an admission of fault. they will say it's a heads they win, tails you lose situation. If the numbers come in well under the models, it's going to be due to the drastic measures taken.
They've already said that. Due to social distancing, it saved so many lives.
Right. And if it had been worse off, then it would have been we didn't do it hard enough and fast enough.
That's right.
So next time, that's what I'm afraid of, especially. The next time anything comes up,
Anything
it's
real that, yeah.
The playbook is now, it's there. And, there will, I think, be some return to normalcy. They can't keep this charade up a whole lot longer. People are not going to stand for it. They're right now telling people, don't even go to the grocery stores. I mean, you're talking about people in a country whose average savings is like $400. Like people aren't prepared for this. I am very fortunate in that I have a yard and I was a bit of a prepper, so I have some stuff.
Well, and zero interest rate for the past 10 years has really kind of forced people to not have savings. I mean, you're basically a sucker. If you have a bunch of savings, you're just losing value.
I am a sucker, gladly right now. But yeah, it's the recipe is a disaster and it's baked in the cake, and the next one's going to be even worse. And I mean, who knows what it'll take to trigger this type of response again? Because I think all the wrong lessons will be learned from this by the people, by the majority of the people who are at the same time in one breath saying Trump is literally Hitler, but now they're saying he's not Hitlerian enough. So work that out on your own. I don't know how that works, but that's kind of the end of the show. I'll give you guys each a moment to comment before we get into Kathleen Turner Overdrive on this episode 176 of the show, the super lengthy Easter special, because we're already at an hour and 41 minutes on this one.
Yeah. So on this Easter special, thank you all for listening. This was a really fun discussion. Listen to a couple of heathens talk to a Christian about a religious movie. It's a little bit out of my comfort zone, and I kind of like it like that. I mean, I used to be a Christian back in the day, and I have no horror stories about why I'm no longer a Christian, but I love my Christian brothers and sisters who are out there putting their religion above the state, and I wish more of them would just reject the state entirely, but that just goes to show how much more work we have to do. So thank you for joining us on this episode. We'll see you next week. Thank you to Stephen. I'll let you have the last word, sir.
I appreciate it again. Thank you for having me on twice now, and really enjoy you guys also, stepping out of those comfort zones and watching these movies and discussing them. It's been a really good time, and I hope we can do it again.
All right. Yeah, we'd love to have you back. And it doesn't necessarily need to be on an Easter or any particular religious holiday, though I think it kind of ties in. So, whatever you want to do, we'll love to have you back. All right. Well, thank you, audience. Check us out next week doing Soylent Green. We'll be back more in our dystopian comfort zone as we're quarantined in FEMA Region 10. And we will be talking with Dr. Dennis Foster again in his triumphant return for Soylent Green next week. Check out Anarcho-Christian.com for Stephen's work and more. And support us on Patreon, actualanarchy.com/Patreon. And we will see you guys all next week. Maximum freedom. Don't let freedom die, people. Please. We are so
Freedom
close.
caught COVID. I'm sorry. Freedom is dead, Daniel.
Yeah,
They got COVID-19.
Freedom is elderly and frail. And
It's got comorbidities.
need some freaking ventilator machines right now. And we need to spark the brush fires of ventilators to keep it going. So thank you, guys. Join us next week. We appreciate you, and we appreciate you, Stephen. Thank you again. And stick around for Kathleen Turner Overdrive right after this, everyone.
The Chipmunks. CHIPMUNK. We're the Chipmunks. Guaranteed to brighten your day.
do 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 do.